part is just a Rube Goldberg system that arose by accident. There's massive amounts of excess cost. There's huge amounts of just extending death so that people can make more money, which is disgusting. So there's a lot wrong with the system. And of course, the politicians on each side don't really try and figure it out. They just hate each other and scream at each other. So it's a disgusting outcome. And of course, the cost goes up 3, 4, 5, 6% a year. So there's a lot wrong and there's a lot right.
So how can we fix it, though?
Well, it'd be easy to fix it if you had a benign despot. A benign despot would create a single-payer system with people being able to opt out into private care that was a little faster or fancier, like all of Europe and Canada. And they would stop this prolonging death so doctors and hospitals can make more money, which doesn't much happen in Germany and doesn't much happen in Kaiser either. And I mean, Kaiser permanently medical plan. So we have a lot that we should be fixed, but getting it done against the vested interests through our political system is just absolute hell. But Warren was right that our manufacturers have a huge competitive disadvantage caused by the health system because the manufacturers providing the medical care for all the employees, and the European companies we compete with fobs that off on the government. It's a huge disadvantage. And the other thing that the Europeans have that we don't is the VAT.
Yeah.
And the VAT is a very sensible tax. And I think that you young people will live to see a United States VAT and a health care system that looks a lot like Canada's.
Yes.
With a better private opt-out system. I see nothing wrong with a bunch of people choosing to pay their doctors more and opting out of the system. But I think having a basic level of care for everybody with no insurance aspect as a right, I think is a good idea.
So
now, for a Republican, that's a very unusual way.
I was about to say, so you are saying a single-payer system is really the answer?
Yes.
With an opt-out on the high end?
Yes. And the abuses you want is this prolonging death to make money, unnecessary treatment, which there's a lot, and profiteering, which there's a lot, and pomposity and bureaucracy. If something goes wrong in a hospital, you end up with a malpractice case with 2 or 3 sets of lawyers arguing whether it was the hospital or the doctor or this or that. In good places like the University of Michigan, when they do anything wrong, they just admit it because everybody's working for the University of Michigan, the doctors, the hospital, the janitors, everything. And if something goes wrong to a patient, it's somebody's fault, they just admit it and say, what can we do to help you? And their costs are less and their system is fairer and they don't have a lot of crazy, crooked lawyers. It's way better. There's a lot that can be improved. And I think you people will live to see it, but I won't.
Well, I guess it remains.
That was Charlie Munger, the vice chair of Berkshire Hathaway, the cohort of Warren Buffett. Welcome to our Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting show here on WBRN. This is a numbers man. Here we do this every year, is cover the event that is known as the Woodstock of Capitalism out in Omaha, Nebraska. We will have an edited version of their annual meeting coming up here in the minute. But we'll just highlight a few things, and that is one of the highlights there, Mr. Munger talking about a single payer. He is no doubt a Republican, he's a conservative, and Mr. Buffett had talked about the competitive disadvantage. Now, that is a case for an industrialized capitalist country. The others have a single payer system. Now, I don't know about the VAT, that's the value-added tax. That probably will come. That is added to a product. But if you have a healthcare system What that means is a manufacturer in another country, say the UK or in Canada, does not have to worry about covering their workers' insurance or part of it, nor do the workers. It is all added in. And he gave some very sound reasons for what happens, and it can be managed properly so that everyone in the country would have insurance. The profiteering and waste, it would not disappear overnight, but it would be, as they say, milked out of the system. So this, in terms of economics, is a very good thing. Now you have all of this profiteering. The insurance companies, of course, would disappear. Now, some people would have policies, but very, very few. That would be to cover various exotic things that the national plan did not cover, sort of like Medicare today. You have Medicare Advantage, and that would disappear virtually too, because pre-existing conditions, checkups, etc., would be covered under this plan. So most things would be covered, and that burden would be taken off. But not only that burden in the manufacturing sector, is in the high-tech sector also. And that's a big disadvantage there. So we look to those items. Now, this is one interesting thing we saw. Not only this political issues being brought up, we had climate change. There was an amendment there on a show we did on the Numbers Man part from WBRN. We titled it Old Time Capitalism, and a number of things came up in terms of motions at the shareholders meeting. Climate change, the water protectors were there and they were allowed to speak, and also they talked about the from I think Creighton University there in Omaha, the moral imperative in terms of methane gas and various other things. The vast empire known as Berkshire Hathaway holding percentages in companies like the energy company that is responsible excuse me, for the latest pipeline in the Dakotas, and how that actually affects people. Giving, political giving by some of the companies, and there are many, many of these. We'll have the annual report appended if someone wants to look at it. There are companies they own that you've not heard of. Some of the larger ones you have heard of, and it came up there also. But they do not have transparency. It's left to the individual companies, and as Warren Buffett said, some of the candidates that they give to, he would never vote for them. But that is the way of quote-unquote doing the business. And that is something we need to get away from. That's why we have Dodd-Frank. That's why we have the Consumer Protection Agency. But under the current administration by DJ Trump and company, many of those regulations are being pulled back or eliminated. The EPA has been designated. There, much of the quote-unquote science there has been taken away from the websites. Fortunately, many of the scientists were able to save this public information. It was what we call scrubbed, and it can be obtained. But it has caused some problems, and also a number of the largest groups on Wall Street. These are groups like the California Teachers Pension Fund, etc., have assigned a letter stating that this administration should not pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. Now, this is nothing but a political gimmick, a very short-term advantage that does not run with the philosophy of Berkshire Hathaway. What they talk about is long-term investing, not the short-term 6 months, 1 year type of investment. Warren Buffett talked about this, and many of the capitalists, so-called hedge funds, corporate raiders, etc., that come in, buy up a company's assets, and then at the same time take the assets, turn them around, and sell it as a profit. That was Will and Romney's company there. So these are the kinds of things that you will see out there, and they are not to the benefit, the long-term benefit of the workers at the company. And this is where you have a mixture with this administration. It calls itself a populist administration, but at the same time they represent the worst in capitalism, the robber barons type of capitalism with absolutely no transparency at all. Highlighted there also was a problem at Wells Fargo, cheating customers. Warren Buffett talked about this, the fake accounts, etc. But yet it was indicated in the press that the proxies that they voted, but Buffett voted, etc., favored the current board. Now, the chair of that board, the CEO placed at Wells, has resigned. So, in other words, there are problems galore there, and those problems do not go away. Period. So thus we had at this particular meeting many things that you would not have at other corporate type of meetings. Period. Now, as expected, now these resolutions here, all shareholder resolutions were defeated. And according to Buffett here, a capitalist system will always hurt some people, but as the Chicago minister Jesse Jackson said, our job is to take the tricks out of the system, and many of the tricks are still in the system. So that is one of the things that we want to do. Now to another part of the meeting concerning one of their insurance. They have reinsurance also, but they have Glauco here, automobile type insurance. The idea of self-driving cars would hurt the profitability of that particular arm. So Geico itself would be hurt, and these are some of the changes from the old-time capitalism type setup. Period. And we will see more of that as we move along with self-driving cars and what is known as automation. There are various numbers floating around. Up to 30% of the workforce in the U.S. Will change, and that would affect some of the things that the Berkshire Hathaway, the Berkshire Hathaway organization now has there. One, IBM and its cloud computing part enterprise there has been hurt because of competition from Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, those kinds of things. Part of the problem, IBM has never figured out the proper management or sales arm for their cloud unit. They're using people that are really not cloud people. And for the Amazon part, it was very, very easy. Amazon had a huge cloud computing operation serving their retail function. So what they were able to do was just simply expand that and then start selling storage space, effectively what happened there, to anyone, and then adding on services, their SaaS's, as they call them, software as a service, adding that particular mix in there. So thus we have now a cloud that is equivalent to the old days when we rented mainframe computer space. But in addition, they have such things as backup, virus protection, etc. are all added in there. so you can make a much more profit. And application software as a service type operation of Microsoft has been included in there. IBM has went to some of that, but they are new to the party. And this is one of the problems. When you have something like cloud computing, very generic name, out there, it appeared thousands of people were trying to sell or resell the service. Many of those went away, but there's still regional players and Pacific players. Storage is very cheap. Building data centers is not. You have them in Iceland, places like that. You have to cool them, and that's a lot of the money. The hardware itself is not that expensive, but the cooling is very expensive. So these are some of the challenges that Berkshire has. The drinking of Coke there, that was also brought up as an amendment. The sugar, not very good for health, no matter what Warren Buffett says. He's been lucky. He's 86 years old, and Charlie Munger is 93. But realistically, this was a more humanizing meeting, and that we are very appreciative of. So on we go to a summary. This is actually, you will hear from Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger as they answer questions from the stockholders. Very few stockholder meetings are like this. They've been doing it for 50-something years, and will no doubt continue to do it as long as they're there. And we'll assume that the replacements will also do it, assembled in Omaha, and of course now they are live streamed via Yahoo. On the 7th of May 2016, this is Numbers Man for WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. Good day.
They made a third mistake when they totally underestimated the impact of what they had done once it became uncovered, because there was a penalty of $185 million, and in the banking business, people get fined billions and billions of dollars for mortgage practices and all kinds of things. The total fines against the big banks, I don't know whether it totals 30 or 40 or billion or whatever the number may be. So they measured the seriousness of the problem by the dimensions of the fine, and they thought a $185 million fine signaled a less offensive practice than something involved $2 billion, and they were totally wrong on that. But the main problem was they didn't act when they learned about it. It was bad enough having a bad system, but they didn't act. At Berkshire, we have the main source of information for me about anything that's being done wrong at a subsidiary is the hotline. Now, we get 4,000 or so hotline reports, or that come, we get communications on the hotline, perhaps 4,000 times a year, and most of them are frivolous. You know, the guy next to me has bad breath or something like that. I mean, but there are a few serious ones, and the head of our internal audit, Becky Amick, looks at all those people. A lot of them come in anonymous, probably most of them, and some of them she refers back to the companies, probably most of them. But anything that looks serious, you know, I will hear about, and that has led to action. We'll put them more than once, and we spent real money investigating some of those. We put special investigators sometimes on them, and like I say, it is uncovered certain practices that we would not at all condone at the parent company. I think it's a good system. I don't think it's perfect. I don't know what. I'm sure they've got an internal audit at Wells Fargo, and I'm sure they've got a hotline, and I don't know the facts, but I would just have to bet that a lot of communications came in on that, and I don't know what their system was for getting them to the right person, and I don't know who did what at any given time. But it was a huge, huge, huge error if they were getting, and I'm sure they were, getting some communications and they ignored them or they just sent them back down to somebody down below. Charlie, you followed it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, put me down as skeptical when some law firm thinks they know how to fix something like this. If you're in a business where you have a whole lot of people under incentives very likely to cause a lot of misbehavior, of course you need a big compliance department. Every big wirehouse stock brokerage firm has a huge compliance department, and if we had one, we would have a big compliance department too, wouldn't we, Warren?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that everybody should try and solve their problems with more and more compliance. I think we've had less trouble over the years by being more careful in whom we pick to have power and having a culture of trust. I think we have less trouble, not more.
But we will have trouble from time to time.
Yes, of course. Yeah. We'll be blindsided someday.
Charlie says an ounce of prevention. He said when Ben Franklin, who he worships, said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, he understated it, that an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And I would say a pound of cure promptly applied is worth a ton of cure that's delayed. And problems don't go away. John Goodfriend said that problem originally was, he called it a traffic ticket. He told the troops there at Solomon it was a traffic ticket, and it almost brought down a business. Some other CEO that day described the problem that he had encountered as a footfall, and it resulted in incredible damage to the institution and so on. You've got to act promptly, and frankly, I don't know any better system than hotlines and anonymous letters. To me, I get anonymous letters, and I've gotten 3 or 4 of them, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, that have resulted in major changes. And very, very occasionally they're signed. Usually, almost always they're anonymous, but it wouldn't make any difference because there will be no retribution against anybody, obviously, if they call our attention to something that's going wrong. But I will tell you, as we sit here, somebody is doing, quite a few people are probably doing something wrong at Berkshire, and usually it's very limited. I mean, it may be stealing small amounts of money or something like that. But when it gets to some sales practice like was taking place at Wells Fargo, you can see the kind of damage it would do. We will now shift over to the analysts and Johnny Brent.
Hi, Warren. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for having me. You've addressed the risk of driverless cars to Geico's business, but it strikes me that driverless trucks could narrow the cost advantage of railroads even if the number of crew members in a locomotive eventually declines from 2 to 0. Is autonomous technology more of an opportunity or more of a threat for the Burlington Northern?
Oh, I would say that driverless trucks are a lot more of a threat than an opportunity to the Burlington Northern, and I would say that if driverless cars became pervasive, it would only be because they were safer, and that would mean that the overall economic cost of auto-related losses had gone down, and that would drive down the premium income of Geico. So I would say both of those, and autonomous vehicles, widespread, would hurt us if they spread to trucks, and they would hurt our auto insurance business. I think my personal view is that they will certainly come. I think they may be a long way off, but that will depend. It'll probably, frankly, depend on experience in the first early months of the introduction in other than test situations. And if they make the world safer, it's going to be a very good thing, but it won't be a good thing for auto insurers. And similarly, if they learn how to move trucks more safely, tends to be driver shortages in the truck business now. It obviously improves their position vis-a-vis the railroads. Charlie?
Well, I think that's perfectly clear.
finally approval all these years. Okay. Station 1, the shareholder.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. My name is Brian Martin, and I'm from Springfield, Illinois. In the HBO documentary Becoming Warren Buffett, you had a great analogy comparing investing to hitting a baseball and knowing your sweet spot. Ted Williams knew his sweet spot was a pitch right down the middle. When both of you look at potential investments, what attributes make a company a pitch in your sweet spot that you'll take a swing at and invest in?
Well, I'm not sure I can define it in exactly the terms you would like, but we sort of know it when we see it, and it would tend to be a business that, for one reason or another, we can look out 5 or 10 or 20 years and decide that the competitive advantage that it had at the present would last over that period, and it would have a trusted manager that would not only fit into the Berkshire culture, but that was eager to join the Berkshire culture. And then it would be a matter of price. But the main, when we buy a business, essentially we're laying out a lot of money now based on what we think that business will deliver over time. And the higher the certainty with which we make that prediction, the better we feel about it. You can go back to the first, wasn't the first outstanding business we bought, but it was kind of a watershed event, which was a relatively small company, See's Candy. And the question when we looked at See's Candy in 1972 was, would people still want to be both eating and giving away that candy in preference to other candies? And it wouldn't be a question of people buying candy for the low bid. And we had a manager we liked very much, and we bought a business that was paid $25 million for it net of cash, and it was earning about $4 million pre-tax then, and we must be getting close to $2 billion or something like that pre-tax that we've taken out of it. But it was only because we felt that people would not be buying necessarily a lower price candy. I mean, it does not work very well if you go to your wife or your girlfriend on Valentine's Day, I hope they're the same person, and say, here's a box of candy, honey, I took the low bid. It loses a little as you go through that speech. And we made a judgment about See's Candy that it would be special, and probably not in the year 2017, but we certainly thought it would be special in 1982 and 1992, and fortunately we were right on it. And we're looking for more See's Candies, only a lot bigger. Charlie?
Yeah, but it's also true that we were young and ignorant then. And
now we're old and ignorant. Yeah.
Yes, that's true too. And the truth of the matter is that it would have been very wise to buy See's Candy at a slightly higher price. And if they'd asked it, we wouldn't have done it. So we've gotten a lot of credit for being smarter than we were.
Yeah, and to be more accurate,
yeah.
If it had been $5 million more, I wouldn't have bought it. Charlie would have been willing to buy it. So, fortunately, that we didn't get to the point where we had to make that decision that way. But he would have pushed forward when I probably would have faded. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that the guy came around. Actually, the seller was the grandson of Mrs. C, wasn't he, Charlie? He was Larry C.'s son. Am I correct? Or Larry C.'s brother. But he was not interested in the business, and he was more interested in girls and grapes, actually. And he almost changed his mind. Well, he did change his mind about selling, and I wasn't there, but Rick Aaron told me that Charlie went in and gave an hour talk on the merits of girls and grapes over having a candy company. This is true, folks. And the fellow sold to us. So I pulled Charlie out in emergencies like that.
We were very lucky that early the habit of buying horrible businesses because they were really cheap. It gave us a lot of experience trying to fix unfixable businesses as they headed downward toward doom. And that early experience was so horrible, fixing the unfixable, that we were very good at avoiding it thereafter. So I would argue that our early stupidity helped us.
Yeah. Yeah. We learned we could not make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
No,
so,
we learned.
So we went around looking for silk.
But you have
after
to try it for a long time and fail and have your nose rubbed in it to really understand it.
Okay, Becky. Becky, quick.
This question comes from a shareholder named Mark Blackley in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who says, there has been more news than usual in some of Berkshire's core stock holdings. Wells Fargo and the incentive and new account scandal. American Express losing the Costco relationship and playing catch-up in the premium card space. United Airlines and customer service issues. Coca-Cola and slowing soda consumption. How much time is spent reviewing Berkshire stock holdings, and is it safe to assume if Berkshire continues to hold these stocks that the thesis remains intact?
Well, we spend a lot of time thinking. Those are very large holdings. If you add up American Express, Coca-Cola, and Wells Fargo, I mean, you're getting up, well into the high tens of billions of dollars, and those are businesses we like very much. They're different characteristics. In the case of, you mentioned United Airlines, we actually are the largest holder of all four of the large. We're the largest holder of the four largest airlines, and that is much more of an industry thought. But all businesses have problems, and some of them have some very big pluses. I personally, you mentioned American Express. If you read American Express's first quarter report and talk about their platinum card, the platinum card is doing very well. The gains around the world, I think there were 17% or something like that in buildings in the UK, and 15% is the original currency, or the local currency, Japan, Mexico, and very good in the United States. There's competition in all these businesses. If we thought we did not buy American Express or Wells Fargo or United Airlines, Coca-Cola, with the idea that they would never have problems or never have competition, why we did buy them is we thought they had very, very strong hands, and we liked the financial policies in the case of many of them. We like their position. We bought a lot of businesses, and we do look to see where we think they have durable competitive advantage, and we recognize that if you've got a very good business, you're going to have plenty of competitors who are going to try and take it away from you, and then you make a judgment as to the ability of your particular company and product and management to ward off competitors. They won't go away, but we think, I'm not going to get into the specific names on it, but those companies generally are very well positioned. I've likened essentially, if you've got a wonderful business, even if it's a small one like See's Candy, you basically have an economic castle, and in capitalism, people are going to try and take away that castle from you. So you want a moat around it, protecting it in various ways that can protect it, and then you want a knight in the castle that's pretty darn good at warding off marauders. But they're going to be marauders, and they'll never go away. And if you look at, I think Coca-Cola was 1886, American Express was 51 or 52, starting out with an express business. Wells Fargo with, I don't know what year they were started. Incidentally, American Express was started by Wells and Fargo as well. So these companies had lots of challenges, and they'll have more challenges, and the companies we own have had challenges. Our insurance business has had challenges, but we started with National Indemnity as $8 million purchase in 1968, and fortunately we've had people like Tony Nicely at Geico, and we've had G. Jane, who's added tens of billions of value, and we've got some smaller companies that you probably don't even know about, but really have done a terrific job for us. So there'll always be competition in insurance, but there'll always be things to do that a really intelligent management with a decent distribution system, various things going for them, can do to ward off the marauders. So to the specific question, how much time is spent reviewing the holdings, I would say that I do it every day. I'm sure Charlie does it every day. Charlie?
Well, I don't think I got anything to add to that either.
We'll cut his salary if he doesn't participate here. Okay, Jay Gelb.
This question is on Berkshire's retroactive reinsurance deal with AIG, which was the largest ever of its kind. Based on AIG's track record of reserve deficiencies and the opportunity for Berkshire to invest the float, what is your level of confidence that this contract covering up to $20 billion of AIG's reserves in return for $10 billion of premiums will ultimately be profitable for Berkshire?
Well, at the time we do every deal, I think it's smart. And then sometimes I find out otherwise as we go along. The deal, that Jay knows, but might be unfamiliar to many people, is that AIG transferred to us the liability for 80% of $25 billion, excess of $25 billion. In other words, they had to pay the first $25 billion, and then on the next $25 billion, we had to pay 80% of what they paid, up to a limit of $20 billion, 80% of 25. And we got paid $10.2 billion for that. And and this applies to their losses in many classes of business, written or earned before December 31st, 2015. So Ajit Jain, who has made a lot more money for Berkshire for you than I have, but he evaluates that sort of transaction. We talk about it a fair amount ourselves. I just find it interesting. I particularly find the $10.2 billion that they're going to give us interesting. And we come to the conclusion that we think we'll do well by getting $10.2 billion today with a maximum payout of $20 billion over some between now and Judgment Day on this large piece of business. AIG had very good reasons for doing this because their reserves had been under criticism, and this essentially probably it should have, I think, put to bed the question whether they were under-reserved on that business. And we get the $10.2 billion, and the question is how fast we pay out the money and how much money we pay out. And Ajit does 99% of the thinking on that, and I do 1%. And we project out what we think will happen, and we know whatever our projection is that it will be wrong, but we try to be conservative. And we've done a fair amount of these deals. This is the largest. The second largest was a creature that was formed out of Lloyd's of London some years ago. And we've been wrong on one transaction that involved something over $1 billion of premium. I mean, clearly wrong. And there are a couple of others that may or may not work out depending on what you assume we have earned on the funds. But they're okay. But they probably didn't come out as well as we thought they would, though. But overall, we've done okay on this. It's less okay when we're sitting around with $90+ billion of cash. So the incremental $10.2 billion we took in the first quarter is earning us peanuts at the moment. And peanuts is not what fits into the formula for making this an attractive deal. So we do have to assume we'll find uses of the money, but the money will be with us quite a while. And I think our calculations are on the conservative side. They're not the identical calculations that AIG makes. I mean, we come up with our own estimate of payouts and all of that. And I think it was quite a good transaction from AIG's standpoint, because they did take $20 billion of potential losses off for $10.2 billion, and I think they satisfied the investing community that they were quite unlikely to have adverse development in the period prior to 2015 that was not accounted for by this transaction. Charlie?
Well, I think it's intrinsically a dangerous kind of activity, but that's one of its attractions. I don't think there are any two people in the world that are better at this kind of transaction than Ajit and Warren, and nobody else has had the experience we've had. Just get me in a lot more of those businesses, and I'll accept a little extra worry.
There's one thing I should mention too, that we actually were the only insurance operation in the world that would write that sort of a contract, and that where it would be satisfactory to the other party. I mean, when somebody hands you $10.2 billion and says, I'm counting on you to pay $20 billion back, even if it's 50 years from now on the last dollar, there are very few people that they want to hand $10.2 billion to. So there's limited people on the other side. I mean, there's not that many people remotely that have that kind of size deal.
Very few is a good expression. He means one.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to station 2.
Hello, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is Grant Gibson. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and this is my 5th consecutive year here, so thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it. With all due respect, Mr. Buffett, this question is for Mr. Munger. In your career of thousands of negotiations and business dealings, could you describe for the crowd which one sticks out in your mind as your favorite or as otherwise noteworthy?
Well, I don't think I've got a favorite, but the one that probably did us the most good as a learning experience was See's Candy. It just, the power of the brand, the unending flow of ever-increasing money with no work.
Sounds nice.
It was, and I'm not sure we would have bought the Coca-Cola if we hadn't bought the Seas. I think that a life properly lived is just learn all the time. And I think Berkshire's gained enormously from these investment decisions by learning through a long period. Every time you appoint a new person that's never had big capital allocation experience, it's like rolling the dice. And I think we're way better off having done it so long. But the decisions blend. And the one feature that comes through is the continuous learning. If we had not kept learning, you wouldn't even be here. You'd be alive probably, but not here.
There's nothing like the pain of being in a lousy business to make you appreciate a good one.
Well, there's nothing like getting into a really good one. That's a very pleasant experience, and it's a learning experience. I have a friend who says the first rule of fishing is to fish where the fish are, and the second rule of fishing is to never forget the first rule. And we've gotten good at fishing where the fish are.
Yeah, that's only metaphorically. I went to fish with Charlie one time.
There are too many other boats in the damn water, but the fish are still there.
Yeah, we bought a department store in Baltimore in 1966, and there's really nothing like being in the experience of trying to decide whether you're going to put a new store in an area that hasn't really developed yet enough to support it, but your competitor may move there first, and then you have the decision of whether to jump in, and if you jump in, that kind of spoils it. Now you got 2 stores where even 1 store isn't quite justified. How to play those games, those business games, is you learn a lot by trying, and what you really learn is which ones to avoid. I mean, you just stay out of a bunch of terrible businesses, you're off to a very great start, because we've tried them all.
But you can really learn because the experience is a lot like eating cockle burgers, and it really gets your attention.
Well, we won't expand on that. Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Good morning, Warren. This question comes from a longtime shareholder who, I should tell you, accosted me last night in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel with this question. Warren, for years you stayed away from technology companies, saying they were too hard to predict and didn't have moats. Then you seemed to change your view about technology when you invested in IBM, and again when you recently invested in Apple. But then on Friday you said IBM had not met your expectations and sold a third of our stake. Do you view IBM and Apple differently? And what have you learned about investing in technology companies?
Well, I do view them differently, but obviously, when I bought the IBM, started buying it 6 years ago, I thought it would do better in the 6 years that have elapsed than it has. And Apple, I regard them as being a quite different business. I think Apple was much more of a consumer products business in terms of in terms of sort of analyzing moats around it and consumer behavior and all that sort of thing. It's obviously a product with all kinds of tech built into it, but in terms of laying out what their prospective customers will do in the future as opposed to, say, on IBM's customers, it's a different sort of analysis. That doesn't mean it's correct, and we'll find out over time, but they are two different types of decisions, and I was wrong on the first one, and we'll find out whether I'm right or wrong on the second. But I do not regard them as apples and apples, and I don't quite regard them as apples and oranges, but it's somewhat in between on that. Charlie?
Well, we avoided the tech stocks because we felt we had no advantage there and other people did. And I think that's a good idea, not to play where the other people are better. But if you asked me in retrospect what was our worst mistake in the tech field, I think we were smart enough to figure out Google. Those ads worked so much better in the early days than anything else. So I would say that we failed you there. And we were smart enough to do it and didn't do it. We do that all the time, too.
Yeah, we were their customer very early on with Geico, for example, and we saw. I don't. These figures are way out of date, but as I remember, we were paying them $10 or $11 a click or something like that. And anytime you're paying somebody $10 or $11 every time somebody just punches a little thing where you've got no cost at all, that's a good business unless somebody's going to take it away from you. And so we were close up seeing the impact of that. And incidentally, if any of you don't have anything to do in your hotel rooms tonight, just keep punching Progressive or something, and you're gonna don't really do that. The thought just happened to cross my mind. But that is, you've never seen a business, almost never seen a business like it, where and I think for LASIK surgery and things like that, I think the figures were, $60 or $70 a click with no incremental, no cost. So, and I knew the guys. I mean, they actually designed their prospectus. They came to see me, and they, a little bit after the original one, when they went public, a little bit after Berkshire even. And so I had plenty of ways to ask questions or anything of the sort and educate myself, but I blew it.
We blew Walmart, too. When it was a total cinch, we were smart enough to figure that out, and we didn't. Yeah, figuring out execution is what counts. So, anyway, and I could be making two mistakes on IBM. I mean, it's harder to predict, in my view, the winners in various items, or how much price competition will enter in to something like cloud services and all that. I made a statement the other day, which it's really remarkable, and I asked Charlie whether he could think of a situation like it, where one person
has built an extraordinary economic machine in two really pretty different industries, almost simultaneously, as has happened
from a standing start at zero.
From a standing start at zero with competitors with lots of capital and everything else, to do it in retailing and to do it with the cloud, like Jeff Bezos has done. I mean, I mean, people like the Mellons invested in a lot of different industries and all of that, but he has been in effect the CEO simultaneously of two businesses starting from scratch. That if Andy Grove at Intel used to say, think about if you had a silver bullet and you could shoot it and get rid of one of your competitors, who would it be? Well, I think that both in the cloud and in retail, there are a lot of people that would aim that silver bullet at Jeff, and he's done it's a different sort of game. But he's, at the Washington Post, he's played that hand as well as anybody I think possibly could. So it's a remarkable business achievement where he's been involved actually in the execution, not just bankrolling it, of two businesses that are probably as feared by their competitors almost as any you can find. Charlie, you got further thoughts?
Well, we're sort of like the Mellons, old-fashioned people who've done all right. And Jeff Bezos is a different species.
And we missed it entirely, incidentally. We never owned a share of Amazon. Okay, Greg Warren.
Warren, my question relates to some recent stock purchases as well. Unlike the railroads, which benefit from colossal barriers to entry due to their established, practically impossible to replicate networks of rail and rights of way, the airline industry seems to have few, if any, advantages. Even with the consolidation we've seen during the past 15 years, the barriers to entry are few and the exit barriers are high. The industry also suffers from low switching costs and intense pricing competition and is heavily exposed to fuel costs, with rising fuel prices being difficult to pass on and declining fuel prices leading to more price competition. Compare this with rail customers who have few choices and thus wield limited buying power, and where fuel charges allow the industry to mitigate fuel price fluctuations. While you've noted several times since the airline stock purchases were announced that the two industries are quite different and that comparisons should not be made to Berkshire's move into railroads a decade ago, could you walk us through what convinced you that the airlines were different enough this time around for Berkshire to invest close to $10 billion in the four major airlines? Because it would seem to me that UPS, which you have a small stake in, and FedEx, both of which have wider economic moats built on more identifiable and durable competitive advantages, would be a better option for long-term investors.
Yeah, the decision in respect to airlines had no connection with our being involved in the railroad business. I mean, you can classify them in, maybe in as transportation businesses or something, but it had no connection, no more connection than the fact we own Geico or any other business. You couldn't pick a tougher industry, ever since Orville went up, and I said, that if anybody had really been thinking about investors, they should have had Wilbur shoot him down and saved everybody a lot of money for 100 years. You can go to the internet and type in airlines and bankrupt, and you'll see that something like 100 airlines in that general range, gone bankrupt in the last few decades. And actually, Charlie and I were directors for some time of U.S. Air, and people write about how we had a terrible experience in U.S. Air. It was one of the dumbest things I've ever done. And there's a lot of
made a fair amount of money out of it, too.
Yeah, and we made a lot of money out of it.
It's undeserved.
But we made a lot of money out of it because there was one little brief period when people got all enthused about U.S. Air. And after we left as directors and after we sold our position, U.S. Air managed to go bankrupt twice in the subsequent period. I mean, you've named not all of them, but you've named a number of factors that just make for terrible economics. And I will tell you that if capacity, it's a fiercely competitive industry. The question is whether it's a suicidally competitive industry, which it used to be. I mean, when you get virtually every one of the major carriers and dozens and dozens and dozens of minor carriers going bankrupt, it ought to come upon you finally that maybe you're in the wrong industry. It has been operating for some time now at 80% or better of capacity being available seat miles. And you can see what deliveries are going to be and that sort of thing. So if you make I think it's fair to say that they will operate at higher degrees of capacity over the next 5 or 10 years than the historical rates, which caused all of them to go broke. Now the question is whether even when they're doing it in the 80s, they will do suicidal things in terms of pricing. Remains to be seen. They actually, at present, are earning quite high returns on invested capital. I think higher than either FedEx or UPS if you actually check that out. But that doesn't mean tomorrow morning, if you're running one of those airlines and the other guy cuts his prices, you cut your prices. And as you say, there's more flexibility when fuel goes down to bring down prices than there is to raise prices when prices go up. So the industry, it is no cinch that the industry will have some more pricing sensibility in the next 10 years than they had in the last 100 years. But the conditions have improved for that. They've got more labor stability than they had before because they're basically all going to, they've been through bankruptcy and they're all going to sort of have an industry pattern bargaining, it looks to me like. They're going to have a shortage of pilots to some degree. But it's not like buying See's candy. Charlie?
No, but the investment world has gotten tougher with more competition, more affluence, and more absolute obsession with finance throughout the whole country. And we picked up a lot of low-hanging fruit in the old days where it was very, very easy and we had huge margins of safety. Now we operate with a less advantageous general climate, and maybe we have small statistical advantages where in the old days it was like shooting fish in a barrel. But that's all right. It's okay if it gets a little harder after you get filthy rich.
Yeah. Charlie's more philosophical than I am on that point. So,
well, I can't bring back the low-hanging fruit, Warren. You're just going to have to keep reaching for the higher branches.
Greg, I think the odds are very high that there are more revenue passenger miles 5 years from now or 10 years from now. If the airlines, if the airline companies are only worth 5 or 10 years from now what they're worth now in terms of equity, we'll get a pretty reasonable rate of return because they're going to buy in a lot of stock at fairly low multiples. So if the company's worth the same amount at the end of the year and there's fewer shares of stock outstanding, over time we make decent money, and all four of the major airlines are buying in stock at a...
You got to remember that the railroads were a terrible business for decades and decades and decades, and then they got good.
Yeah, I like the position. Obviously, by buying all four, it means that it's very hard to distinguish who will do the, at least in my mind, it's hard to distinguish who will do the best. I think the odds are quite high that if you take revenue passenger miles flowing 5 or 10 years from now, it will be a higher number, and there'll be low-cost people to come in, and the Spirits of the world and JetBlues, whatever it may be. But my guess is that all four of the companies we have will have higher revenues. The question is what their operating ratio is. They will have fewer shares outstanding by a significant margin. So even if they're worth just what they're worth today, we could make a fair amount of money, but it is no cinch by a long shot. Okay, station 3.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sibylle Arians. I'm from Germany, and I'm member of board of Ethicon Foundation, Ethics and Economy. I'm very happy that I could put my question here, and maybe you are not as happy as I am to listen to it.
Well, we'll try to stay happy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Mr. Buffett, a few years ago, I saw a movie in which you proclaimed that the print on the dollar bill, "In God We Trust," does not really oppress your philosophy. In your opinion, only cash counts, and your credo is, "In the dollar I trust."
I don't think I've ever said that, actually, but
well, I can show you the movie. That will prove.
Oh, well, send me a clip.
Maybe it was just joking, but always behind a joke there is also a truth. So, well, you laughed heartily at that moment. You, as one of the most richest men of all times on this earth, a good-humored, friendly, elderly gentleman. Whatever motivated those who designed the dollar notes, they certainly wanted to say that there is something higher than the value of this printed paper. Regrettably, you have shown many times in your life that you see this differently. You have accumulated billions of dollars, showed extraordinary cleverness and skill, and you know better to pick up than many others who, like you, use the rules which are inherent to capitalism for their own intentions. But have you ever given a thought to what troubles and sacrifices, slavery and destruction of Mother Earth, and even diseases and deaths stick to the dollar bills which you gather so eagerly? Let's take Coca-Cola. Ethicon Foundation Ethics and Economy from Germany has awarded the Black Planet Award to the members of the board of directors, as well as to the large shareholders, Warren Buffett and Herbert Allen, because you are co-responsible for all of what makes this group make so much money, isn't it? Among other things, Coca-Cola deprives people of their drinking water in drought-prone areas of the world.
Are you asking a question?
Contaminate the groundwater in these areas.
I don't want to interrupt you, but are you making a speech or asking a question?
I put my question right now.
Okay, good.
Will you give up your Coca-Cola shares if the destruction of the environment, the monopolization of the right to healthy drinking water, and the shameless exploitation of the workers continue?
Well, that's more of a speech than a question.
Yeah. I don't think that quote you had earlier. I've said once or twice that it should say "In the Federal Reserve we trust," because they print the money, and if they print too much of it, it could decline in value. But I have never, to my knowledge, I've never said anything like you originally said. And I would say this: I think I've been eating things I like to eat all my life, and Coca-Cola. This Coca-Cola is 12 ounces. I drink about 5 a day. It has about 1.2. It has about 1.2 ounces of sugar in it. And if you look at what different people get their sugar and calories from, they get them from all kinds of things. I happen to believe that I like to get 1.2 ounces with this, and it's enjoyable. Since 1886, people have found it pleasant, and I would say that if you pick every meal in terms of what somebody in some recent publication has told you is the very best for you, offer you that. I say, go to it. But if you told me that I would live 1 year longer, and I don't even think of that, I would live 1 year longer if I'd eat nothing but broccoli and asparagus and everything my Aunt Alice wanted me to eat all my life, or I would eat everything I enjoyed eating, including chocolate sundaes and Coca-Cola and steak and hash browns. I would rather eat in a way I enjoy for my whole life than eat some other way and live another year. And I do think that choice should be mine. If somebody decides sugar is harmful, maybe you'd encourage the government to ban sugar, but sugar and Coca-Cola is not different than eating sugar, put on my grape nuts in the morning or whatever else I'm having. So I think Coca-Cola has been a very, very positive factor in America and the world for a long, long time. And you can look at a list of achievements of the company. And I really don't want anybody telling me I can't drink it. Charlie?
Well, I've solved my Coca-Cola problem by drinking Diet Coke, and I swill the stuff like other people swill I don't know what. And I've been doing it for just as long as you've been taking all those Coca-Colas that are... I've had breakfast with Warren when he has Coca-Colas and nuts. And
pretty damn good, too.
If you keep doing that, Warren, you may not make 100.
Well, I think there's something in longevity to be feeling happy about your life, too.
Absolutely.
Okay, Carol?
This question is from Franz Tromberger of Austria, and it concerns intrinsic value, which is neither, Warren may amend my definition here, but which is neither a company's accounting value nor its stock market value, but is rather its estimated real value. So the question is, at what rate has Berkshire compounded intrinsic value over the last 10 years, and at what rate, including your explanation for it, please, do you think intrinsic value can be compounded over the next 10 years?
Yeah. Intrinsic value, can only be calculated or gains, in retrospect, but the intrinsic value, pure definition, would be the cash to be generated between now and Judgment Day, discounted at an interest rate that seems appropriate at the time, and that's varied enormously over a 30 or 40-year period. If you pick out 10 years and you're back to May of 2007, we had some unpleasant things coming up, but I would say that we've probably compounded at about 10%, and I think that's going to be tough to achieve, in fact, almost impossible to achieve if we continued in this interest rate environment. That's the number one question. If you ask me to give the answer to the question, if I could only pick one statistic to ask you about the future before I gave the answer, I would not ask you about GDP growth. I would not ask you about who was going to be president. A million things. I would ask you what the interest rate is going to be over the next 20 years on average, the 10-year or whatever you wanted to do. And if you assume our present interest rate structure is likely to be the average over 10 or 20 years, then I would say it'd be very difficult to get to 10%. On the other hand, if I were to pick with a whole range of probabilities on interest rates, I would say that rate might be, it might be somewhat aspirational, and it might be doable. And you would say, well, we can't continue these interest rates for a long time. I would ask you to look at Japan, where 25 years ago we couldn't see how their interest rates could be sustained, and we're still looking at the same thing. So I do not think it's easy to predict the course of interest rates at all. And unfortunately, predicting that is embedded in giving a good answer to you. I would say the chances of getting a terrible result in Berkshire are probably as low as about anything you can find. Chances of getting a sensational result are also about as low as anything you can find. So if my best guess would be in the 10% range, but that assumes somewhat higher interest rates, not dramatically higher, but somewhat higher interest rates in the next 10 or 20 years than we've experienced in the last 7 years. Charlie?
Well, there's no question about the fact that the future with our present size is, in terms of percentage rates of return, is going to be less glorious than our past. And we keep saying that, and now we're proving it.
You want to end on that note, Charlie, or would you care?
Well, I do think Warren's right about one thing. I think we have a collection of businesses that, on average, has better investment values than, say, the S&P average. So I don't think you shareholders have a terrible problem.
And I would say we probably, well, I'm certain, we do have more of a shareholder orientation than the S&P 500 as a whole. I mean, this company has a culture where decisions are made as an owner, as a private owner, would make them. And frankly, that's a luxury we have that many companies don't have. I mean, they are under pressures today sometimes to do things. One of the questions I asked the CEO of every public company that I meet is, what would you be doing differently if you owned it all yourself? And the answer, is usually this, that, and a couple of other things. If you would ask us, the answer is we're doing exactly what we would do if we owned them all the stock ourselves. And I think that's a small plus over time. Anything further, Charlie?
I think we have one other advantage. A lot of other people are trying to be brilliant, and we're just trying to stay rational. And it's a big advantage. Trying to be brilliant is dangerous, particularly when you're gambling.
Okay, Jonathan.
If corporate tax rates are reduced meaningfully, Berkshire will enjoy a one-time boost to book value because of its sizable deferred tax liability, and its go-forward earnings should be higher too, at least in theory. How much of the reduced tax rate will be passed along to Berkshire's customers through, for instance, lower electricity rates or lower railroad shipping rates, and how much will go to Berkshire shareholders?
Yeah, the question is, in the case of our utility businesses, all benefit of lower tax rates goes to customers, and it should be, because we are allowed a return on equity in general. I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but we're allowed a return on equity that's computed on an after-tax basis, and the utility commissions would, if taxes were raised, would presumably give us higher rates to compensate for that, and if taxes are lowered, they would say you're not entitled to make more money just because tax rates on equity, because tax rates have been lowered. So forget about the utility portion of the deferred taxes. The deferred taxes that are applicable to our unrealized gains in securities, we would get all the benefit of, because I mentioned we had $90 billion plus of unrealized gains, and if the rates were changed on those in either direction, our owners, dollar for dollar, will participate in that. And then you get into the other businesses. You mentioned the railroad, but it can be all of our other businesses. To some extent, if tax rates are lowered to different degrees in different industries, depending on the number of players, the competitive conditions, some of it almost certainly gets competed away, and some of it would likely not be competed away. And economists can argue about that a lot, but I've seen it in action in a lot of cases. You've had a big decline in rates, for example, in the UK, and we've had them over my lifetime. We had 52% corporate rates. We've had a lot of different numbers. So I have seen how economic behavior works, and I would say that it's certain that some of any lower rate would be competed away, and it's virtually certain that some would inure to the benefit of the shareholders, and it's very industry and company specific in how that plays out. Charlie? Well, with dollar for dollar, I mean, there's 90 or 95 billion. If the rate were to drop 10%, that $9.5 billion is by 10 percentage points. That $9.5 billion is real. On the other hand, if it goes up, as it did, went up from 28 to 35%, they can take it away from us too.
Well, I think it's true that we're peculiar in one way. If things go to hell in a handbasket and then get better later, we're likely to do better than most others. And we don't wish for that, and we don't want our country to have to suffer through it. And we fear what might happen if the country went through the ringer like that. But if that real adversity comes, we're likely to do better in the end. We're good at navigating through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and occasionally there will be
a lot. In fact, we're quite good at it.
There'll be occasional hiccups in the American economy. It doesn't have much to do with who's president or anything like that. Those people may get blamed or given credit for different things, but it's just it is the nature of market systems to occasionally go haywire in one direction or other, and it's been ever thus. It'll be ever thus. It's not on a regular sine wave type picture or anything of the sort, but it's certain to happen from time to time, and we will probably have a fair amount of money and credit at that time, and we're not affected. When the rest of the world is fearful, we know America's going to come out fine, and we will not have any trouble psychologically acting at all. And then the question is, how much do we have in the way of resources? We'll also never put the company in any kind of risk just because we see a lot of opportunities. We'll grab all the ones we can that we can handle and not lose a day of sleep. I didn't quite get that, but in any event, we will now go to Station 4, and if the person yelling out. Are we up there in Station 4? Are you in Station 4?
Dr. Bruce Hertz from Glenview, Illinois. I wanted to thank you for allowing me to attend. I feel both honored and blessed. My question for Mr. Buffett is, you've always advised us to purchase equities that appreciate in value. Yet, a few years ago, you sold your used Cadillac at a tremendous profit. How can you justify selling a depreciating asset for a significant profit? Thank you.
Yeah, well, actually, I gave it to Girls Inc., and they sold it, and it was kind of an interesting. A very nice guy bought it for $100,000 and some $1,000, and I did not. And Girls Inc. got the money, and he came later actually with his family, and he drove it away without any plates. He was driving back to New York, and he got picked up by the police in Illinois, and he said, well, he started giving this explanation about how he'd given this money to Girls Inc. and was driving the car back, and he had this nice-looking family with him, and the cops were quite skeptical. But fortunately, I had signed the dashboard for him as part of the deal. And so they looked at that, and then they just said, well, did he give you any stock tips? And they let him go. I can't recall ever selling a used car at a profit, but I don't think I've sold any personal possession. Well, I've got a house for sale.
You don't have any personal possessions.
Yeah. No, anything you see with a figure attached like that.
You're a fatter version of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi.
The guy was a very nice guy that bought it, and his check cleared, so we're fine. Becky?
I'd like to ask a question that can serve as a follow-up to the question that Carol had asked, and Charlie in that response said that he thinks the Berkshire's businesses on the whole will do better than the S&P 500. Clark Cameron from Birmingham, Alabama, who owns 281 shares of Berkshire B, writes in and asks, why have you advised your wife to invest in index funds after your death rather than Berkshire Hathaway? I believe Munger has counseled his offspring to, quote, not be so dumb as to sell.
She won't be selling any Berkshire to buy the index funds. All of my Berkshire, every single share, will go to philanthropy. So that I don't even regard myself as owning Berkshire. Basically, it's committed. And so far about 40% has already been distributed. So the question is, somebody who is not an investment professional will be, I hope, reasonably elderly by the time that the estate gets settled. And what is the best investment, meaning one that there would be less worry of any kind connected with, and less people coming around and saying, why don't you sell this and do something else and all those things. She's going to have more money than she needs. And the big thing then you want is money not to be a problem. And there will be no way that if she holds the S&P, or virtually no way, absent something happened with weapons of mass destruction, but virtually no way that she'll have all the money that she possibly can use. She'll have a little liquid money so that if stocks are down tremendously at some point, they close the stock exchange for a while, anything like that, she'll still feel that she's got plenty of money. And the object is not to maximize. It doesn't make any difference whether the amount she gets doubles or triples or anything of the sort. The important thing is that she never worries about money the rest of her life. And I had an Aunt Katie here in Omaha, who Charlie knew well, and worked for her husband, as did I. And she worked very hard all her life and had lived in a house she paid, $8,000 for at 45th and Hickory all her life. And because she was in Berkshire, she lived in 97. She ended up with, a few $100 million. And she would write me a letter every 4 or 5 months, and she said, "Dear Warren, I hate to bother you, but am I going to run out of money?" And and I would write her back, and I'd say, "Dear Katie, it's a good question, because if you live 986 years, you're going to run out of money." And then about 4 or 5 months later, she'd write me the same letter again. And I have seen there's no way in the world, if you've got plenty of money, that it should become a minus in your life. And there will be people, if you've got a lot of money, that come around with various suggestions for you, sometimes well-meaning, sometimes not so well-meaning. So if you've got something that's certain to deliver, it was all in Berkshire, they'd say, well, if Warren was alive today, he would be telling you to do this. I just don't want anybody to go through that. And the S&P will be I think actually what I'm suggesting is what a very high percentage of people should do something like that. And I don't think they will have I think there's a chance they won't have as much peace of mind if they own one stock and they've got neighbors and friends and relatives that are trying to do some, like I say, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes otherwise, to do something else. And so I think it's a policy that will get a good result and is likely to stick. Charlie?
Well, as Becky said, the Mungers are different. I want to hold the Berkshire.
Well, I want to hold the Berkshire too.
No, I don't like the. I recognize the logic of the fact that S&P algorithm is very hard to beat. In a diversified portfolio of big companies, it's all but impossible for most people. But I'm just more comfortable with the Berkshire.
Well, it's the family business.
Yeah.
But I've seen too many people as they get older, particularly, being susceptible and just having to listen to the arguments of people coming along.
If you're going to protect your heirs from the stupidity of others, you may have some good system, but I'm not much interested in that subject.
Okay. Okay, Jay.
Berkshire reportedly partnered with 3G in Kraft Heinz's attempt to acquire Unilever for $143 billion. How much was Berkshire willing to invest in this deal? And does this mean Berkshire's next large acquisition is likely to be in partnership with 3G?
Yeah, well, Kraft Heinz, you'd have to distinguish between two situations. Kraft Heinz was a widely owned company in which we and 3G act as a control group and have a little over 50% of the stock. But as originally contemplated, no certainty that this exactly is what would have happened, we would have invested an additional $15 billion, and 3G would have invested an additional $15 billion if a friendly agreement could have been reached. If the deal had been made, if the independent directors of Kraft Heinz had approved the transaction, the likelihood is that we would have invested $15 billion, but it would have required the approval of the independent directors as well. Now, Kraft Heinz, in going forward with making that offer, wanted to be sure that there would be enough equity capital in addition to the debt that would be incurred to make the deal, and so informally we had basically committed the $15 billion. It only was approved on the basis that it'd be a friendly deal with Unilever, and initially we thought they would be at least possibly interested in such a deal, and when we found out otherwise, we withdrew the offer. So it would have been $15 billion of additional money in all probability. Okay, station 5.
Dear Honorable Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, I'm Tian Dehua from China. My company, AI Holdings, is spreading value investing philosophy in Asia. My business partner, Ken Chi, Zhou Guiying, and I are committed to awake 100 million Chinese people to return to rational way of investing. The hardest thing in this world is to change people's values or belief system. And we should like to awake investors to change from speculate in the market to investing in the market. It's like changing the speculators' values or belief system. May I ask you, Mr. Buffett, can you kindly advise us what we should do to spread your value investing philosophy, or is there any word of encouragement? Thank you.
Yeah, when in any system, Keynes wrote about this in 1936, I think it was, in the General Theory, or 35, I think it's chapter 12. It's a great chapter on investing, and he talked about investment and speculation and the propensity of people to speculate and the dangers of it, and worded eloquently. There's always the possibility of, there's always some speculation, obviously, and there's always some value investors and all of that sort of thing in the market. But when speculation gets rampant, and when you're getting what I guess Charlie would call social proof that it's worked recently, people can get very excited about speculating in markets, and we will have it from time to time in this market. There's nothing more agonizing than to see your neighbor, who you think has an IQ about 30 points below you, getting richer than you are by buying stocks, and whether it's internet stocks or whatever, and people succumb to it, and they'll succumb in this economy just as elsewhere. There's also a point which gets to your question. I would say that early on in the development of markets, there's probably there's some tendency for them, I think, to be more speculative than markets that have been around for a couple of hundred years. Because markets have a casino characteristic that has a lot of appeal to people, particularly when they see, like I say, people getting rich around them. And those who haven't been through cycles before are probably a little more prone to speculate than people who have experienced the outcome of wild speculation. So basically in this country, Ben Graham was, in the book I read in 1949, was preaching investment, and that book continues to sell very well. But if the market gets hot, new issues are doing well, and people on leverage are doing well, a lot of people will be attracted to not only speculation but what I would call gambling. And I'm afraid that will be true in the United States. And I think that China, being a newer market, essentially, in which there's widespread participation, is likely to have some pretty extreme experiences in that respect. We will have some in this country too. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with that. The Chinese will have more trouble. They're very bright people. They have a lot of action, and sure, they're going to be more speculative. And it's a dumb idea. And to the extent you're working on it, why, you're on the side of the angels, but lots of luck.
Well, it will offer the investor more opportunities, actually, if they can keep their wits about them. If you have wild speculation, Charlie just mentioned earlier, if we get into periods that are very tough, Berkshire certainly will do reasonably well, because it won't, and we won't get fearful, and fear spreads like you cannot believe until you've seen a few examples of it. At the start of September 2008, you had 35 million people with their money in money market funds with $3.5 trillion in them, and none of them were afraid that dollar wasn't going to be a dollar when they went to cash in their money market fund. And 3 weeks later, they were all terrified, and 175 billion flowed out in 3 days. And so the way the public can react is really extreme in markets. And that actually offers opportunities for investors. People like action, and they like to gamble. And if they think there's easy money to be made, a lot of them, you'll get a rush to it. And for a while, it will be self-fulfilling and create new converts until the day of reckoning comes. So, just keep preaching investing, and if the market swings around a lot, you'll keep adding a few people here and there to a group that recognizes that markets are there to be taken advantage of rather than to instruct you as to what is going on. Okay, Andrew, do you have any more on that, Charlie?
We've done a lot of preaching, Warren, without much effect.
Right. And that's probably good from our standpoint. Okay, Andrew?
Thank you, Warren. This question comes from Ryan Prince. President Donald Trump and his advisors have talked about proposing a substantial investment tax credit to provide incentives for long-term corporate fixed capital investment. In BNSF, Berkshire owns a sprawling infrastructure portfolio requiring regular routine maintenance investment of substantial scale. What impact would an investment tax credit have on BNSF's capital investment decision-making from a return on investment a capital perspective, as well as in terms of timing? And just as importantly, given the current economy and employment picture, would such a tax credit amount to a subsidization of otherwise mandatory maintenance capital investment or a proper incentive to stimulate investment?
Yeah, well, it would all depend on how it was worded, because we've had investment tax credits in this country, and we've had bonus depreciation. It's another form of it. And we do get extra first-year depreciation. That does not enter into our calculation very much. In fact, certainly at the Berkshire level, I've never instructed anybody to do anything different because of investment tax credits or accelerated depreciation. There may be some calculations done down at the operating company level. It's certainly true in something like wind projects and solar projects. They are dependent on the tax law currently. There may come a time when they aren't, but they wouldn't have been done without some subsidization through the tax law. But I would say if you change the depreciation schedules and double depreciation, triple depreciation, that we're going to do what we need to do at the railroad to make it safer and more efficient if we just had ordinary depreciation. And I doubt if there'd be any dramatic differences. Obviously, if you were going to, say, buy a bunch of planes and the law was going to change on December 31st and the math made it better to wait till January 1st or do it this December 31st, you didn't make that kind of calculation. But I can't recall in all the years that I've ever sent out anything to our managers saying, let's do this because the tax law is being changed or might be changed or something of the sort. As I mentioned earlier, it changes just a little bit if you think there's going to be a change in capital gains rates at a given time. Obviously, if the rate's going to be lowered, you would take losses ahead of time and defer gains maybe a little. And that's why it's useful, actually, if the tax committees, the Senate and the House, are working on something, it might be useful if the chairmans would say that if we do make any changes, we're likely to use this effective date or something of the sort. And I think they've done that a few times in the past. We are not... The big tax-driven item is in wind and solar, and that is a specific policy because the government has decided they want to move people, or society has decided they want to move people toward those forms of electric generation, and the market system wouldn't do it. And there may come a time when the market system will do it all by itself. We won't make big changes, and it's so speculative anyway in terms of even what the law would be. But beyond that, if it becomes less speculative as the law, I mean, it really looks like something is going to, it doesn't change us big time at all. Charlie?
Nothing to add. We're not going to change anything at the railroad for some little tax jiggle.
If we need a bridge repaired, we're going to repair the bridge, and if we need a lot of track maintenance all the time and that sort of thing, and it just I don't think Matt and I have ever had to talk about it since we've owned the railroad. Greg?
Warren, my question also relates to Burlington Northern. Despite the current administration's belief that they can bring the coal industry back, market forces continue to lead to the industry's demise. While 90% of U.S. coal consumption is driven by electricity generation, natural gas has been both cheaper and cleaner burning, and renewable electricity generation has remade parts of the market as wind and solar have gained scale and become cheaper alternatives. This has created problems for Burlington Northern, with coal shipments accounting for just 18% of volume and revenue for the railroad last year, down from an average of 24% for both measures the previous 10 years. While some of this was due to a large buildup of coal supplies the past couple of winters, which finally seem to be working their way out, what are your expectations for the contribution coal can make to BNSF longer term? And I know that the railroad currently handles some export shipments going through Canada's Pacific Coast ports, but will there be enough growth there to offset domestic demand, or will BNSF need to rely more heavily on segments like intermodal to offset lost coal volumes?
Yeah, the answer is coal is going to go down over time. I don't think there's much question about that. The specifics of any given year relate very importantly to the price of natural gas. I mean, right now the demand is somewhat up, fair amount up from last year because natural gas is at $3.15 or $3.20, and the utilities can produce electricity in many cases quite a bit cheaper with coal than with natural gas, whereas with the $2 it would be natural gas. But over time, coal is in my mind is essentially certain to decline as a percentage of the revenue of the railroad. The speed at which it does, you don't create generation plants overnight, and so you can't predict the rate. And if natural gas is cheap enough, it's going to be you'll see a big conversion back to natural gas. So coal is going to go down as a percentage of revenues significantly. Certainly over 10 years it'll be quite significant, and who knows exactly year by year. We are looking for other sources of growth than coal. If you're tied to coal, you've got problems. Charlie?
Well, if you go out over the extremely long term, I think that all the hydrocarbons will be used, including all the coal. So I think that in the end, these hydrocarbons are a huge resource for humanity, and I don't think we've got any good substitute. And I've never minded saving them for the next generation. I don't like using them up very fast. So I'm off on a little road on my own on this one. And people think that all this hydrocarbons are going to be stranded and the whole world's going to change. I think we're going to use every drop of the hydrocarbons sooner or later. We'll use them as chemical feedstocks. I regard all these things as very hard to predict, and I'm not at all sure that I would eventually expect natural gas to be pretty short in supply.
A change in storage would make a big difference. We will produce within a few years as much electricity in Iowa, or virtually as much electricity in Iowa from wind as our customers use, but the wind only blows about 35% of the time or something like that, and sometimes it blows too hard. But the storage, having it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is a real problem, even if we've got the capability of producing, like I say, a self-sufficient amount, essentially, in Iowa before very long. Coal, our shipments of coal are up fairly substantially this year on the BNSF, but they were very low last year, and as you said, stockpiles grew and have come down somewhat. They're still on the high side. But in my mind, Charlie's got a longer-term outlook on this. In my mind, we're going to be shipping a whole lot less coal 10 or 20 years from now than we are now. On the other hand, I think there's some decent prospects in other long hauls. I mean, it's a pretty cheap way to move bulk commodities long distance, rail is, and I think it's a good business, but the coal aspect of it's going to diminish. Okay, Station 6.